Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. It's another all hands on deck kind of day here on the Lions 24/7 podcast. Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan will be with me in just a moment. A little bit later, we'll have Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting expert, to break down the budding whiteout list for Penn State. A lot of recruiting opportunity always involved with this whiteout matchup, which is Saturday, 7:30, prime time, top 25 showdown against Iowa. So it has all the ingredients of what will draw recruits and their families to campus. They'll be coming in bunches. They'll be coming from within the region. We've got some long distance travelers to talk about. We'll peel back the curtain list a little bit later with Tyler Calvaruso. If you don't want to wait until then, head over to lions247.com. 30% off annual subscription, $1 for one. If you want to take a peek, it's a great month to do it. It's a great time to start taking that peek too, because this whiteout list is pretty serious and we're only at Monday. It will continue to grow. We'll have plenty of coverage on the recruiting end of things this week, but naturally, it's a big matchup in the Big Ten. We just saw Penn State make their conference debut for the 2023 season. Daniel Gallen joined me from Memorial Stadium on Saturday late afternoon following that matchup. Appreciated his effort to find a quiet space in the stadium. We broke down things for about 45 minutes with our post-game podcast on Saturday. As always, we come back to you on a Monday for a longer look at the most recent matchup, and we'll get into the next contest a little bit more on Tuesday. David Eichholt, who covers the Iowa Hawkeyes, will be on the show with us. We'll be fresh out of Beaver Stadium, where we'll hear from James Franklin for his press conference. But let's put a little more focus back on that 30-13 victory for Penn State, bringing on Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. The Nittany Lions are back in Happy Valley. You guys are back in Happy Valley. I hope travel went pretty smoothly. And Mark, as always on Mondays, I think we want to begin with you because we don't hear from you coming out of the game. General takeaways now that you've had, I guess, about 48 hours or so to digest what you witnessed out in Champaign.
Yeah, I think a lot of us went into that game thinking it was going to unfold in a certain way, and I know I did, having seen Illinois against Kansas and the way Kansas just kind of picked that defense apart. I really thought the Penn State defense was going to be able to do that against Illinois, and, it didn't. And give Brett Bielema credit. I think he threw some things at Drew Aller that maybe confused him a little bit. But the thing I liked, and I think this is the sign of a good team, is it was complementary football. So the offense, it took a while to get clicking. Meanwhile, the defense just absolutely turned it on. I mean, after some poor tackling early, to come through with 5 turnovers and, really bail out the offense to a certain extent, I think was just really impressive. And I think that's the sign of a good team, because throughout the season, you're going to have these ebbs and flows on both sides of the ball. And we've seen games like that where the offense has struggled and then the defense just plays its regular game and maybe doesn't force those turnovers, and it becomes more of a, death fight until the very end. This wasn't that. I mean, they still escaped from that game. Escaped isn't even the right word. They still got out of that game, being able to play a lot of backups in the fourth quarter, which I think a lot of us thought they were going to be able to do, and just in really good shape. So I also thought, and I know we'll get into it a little bit earlier, or a little bit later, excuse me, and when we talk specifically about the offense, but I think that was a good growing experience, a good learning experience for Drew Aller, because what did he do? He didn't win you the game, but he didn't lose you the game when things were going wrong. And we've seen this Penn State team over the last few years enough that when a quarterback tries to force things, we've seen quarterbacks lose games like that. And he didn't. No turnovers, continues to have no turnovers for the season, kept his calm, never got rattled, and that really stood out to me. So I think, again, complementary football during the course of the season, you're going to need different areas to step up. I thought the special teams showed some good things, some not so good things, but they got some of those hidden yards from the return game that we hadn't seen until now. So all those little things I think ended up being really good for Penn State. As you look at it big picture, yes, I know during the game people were frustrated by certain aspects. I kind of gathered that from our in-game thread, and people were getting a little riled up about stuff. Completely understandable, because, you love watching the game, you're having fun, and it does go up and down. But at the end of the day, I think anybody who takes a step back from that performance, that's what a good team does. It's not completely on, but it still wins relatively easily.
And it speaks about where the expectations are for this team. Daniel and I discussed it a little bit in post-game, Mark, just the fact that whoever they're playing, they're not just playing Illinois. They're not just playing West Virginia or Delaware or UMass down the road. they're also being measured up against Michigan and Ohio State. What's Michigan doing this Saturday? What's Ohio?
Right.
How good did they look? Are their stars shining? Are they handling their business with authority? What's going on? Because, and maybe in some ways you're being mentioned, measured up against the 94 team here at Penn State. I mean, people are expecting perfection because of the way this team has been discussed a lot in the preseason because of what they saw from Drew Aller early. And like, ultimately, you didn't get perfection, but you got what would Jane Franklin would call an imperfectly pretty Big Ten road win. And Daniel, let's jump into some of the details now, because the defense was at the spearhead of this entire effort. It was a 5 takeaway performance. The defensive backfield did the heavy lifting there, but we saw the defensive line showcase its depth in a way that we had wondered if we would. And 10 different defensive linemen were involved. All of them were at 20-plus snaps, and 2 of them, Amin Vanover at defensive end, Keziah Izzard at defensive tackle, made their debut after a 2-game absence to start the year. This is what we've all pointed to as a potential strength for this team. This is the kind of matchup that you hoped you could lean on it. And they went deep. They rotated guys, that they kept players relatively fresh. And at the end of the day, I know there were some dicey moments on that opening possession for Illinois, but they kept this ground game bottled up. They forced Luke Altmaier to try to be Superman, and we all saw how that turned out.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what you wanted to see from this defense. We know what Brett Bielema has done against Penn State in the past with really pounding away and trying to win the game on the ground. So, excuse me, the fact that they were able to take that away, make Illinois one-dimensional, and then take advantage of that. I think that's something that's a lesson, something you can take away from this that can really help down the road with some of these teams that you're playing and some of the talent that they have. If you can force them into one area, I mean, I think that the way that Penn State is built in terms of the defensive ends and the secondary, if they can take away the run and force teams to try to beat them through the air, they're in a really, really good spot. And I think we saw a really good example of that with the performance against Luke Altmaier on Saturday. But, as a whole, I think being at or near full strength on this defensive line, being able to rotate 10 players, to put some of these younger guys in that, we've been hearing about, especially on the interior, someone like, I think, Jordan Vandenberg being in the rotation. I think that's a positive for how things are developing. Like you said, the measuring sticks that Penn State is going up against, especially with the defense, I think more than anything, it's, in terms of comparing Penn State and being like, all right, how's this going to look against Michigan? How's this going to look against Ohio State? I think the defensive front against Michigan is maybe the number one thing that comes into people's heads when they watch a game like this and when they do those comparisons. So I think that there is some stuff to clean up. The way that Manny Diaz runs his defense, the linebackers factor in a lot to the success of the guys in front of them. And there's probably a lot to clean up. But I think the fact that Illinois was able to move the ball early, but then after that, Penn State kind of found its footing a little bit and was able to shut them down for the most part, I think bodes well for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, Illinois finished with 62 total rushing yards for the day. A huge stark contrast to what we saw play out in Beaver Stadium a couple of years ago. And just, I thought it was really interesting, the defensive tackle snap distribution. We'll have our snap counts piece and analysis on 247.com here on Monday, so check that out. But according to Pro Football Focus, who tracks these things, Zane Durant and Akeem Beamon, the starters, were at 31 and 28 snaps respectively. But you had Keziah Izzard in game one at 29 snaps, Jordan Vandenberg, who Daniel referenced there, at 29 snaps, Devon Ellies at 28 snaps. I mean, it was a group effort, essentially everybody carrying a similar load by the time you get through 100% of this game. So Izzard steps in with a key role. Vanover is playing in that reserve role that we expected. It seems to be full go right out the gates. And then, of course, Daquan Hardy jumps in and goes almost 40 snaps. And, Mark, we spent time discussing Daquan Hardy's return, what it meant for the entire defensive backfield, for Cam Miller, for Johnny Dixon, et cetera. But you just got to tip your cap to this guy because he didn't miss a stride. And obviously what we heard about behind the scenes didn't get into why he missed the action, but it told the story of a guy who was right there being Daquan Hardy despite not playing those first 120 minutes of football. He comes away with an interception, and he just asserts himself right into the secondary. He obviously is going to have a key role for this team.
Yeah, I have to tip my cap to Daniel because we're sitting in the press box and he said, look, Hardy's playing an outside corner spot. And literally on that play, he intercepted the pass. And I looked at Dan. I was like, what? That was unbelievable. You know what? It speaks to something bigger is that that kid, there's something to him. There's an energy to that kid. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think they still would have had turnovers, but I don't think it's a coincidence that they go on that turnover spree the day that he comes back. Because they play him all over the place. He still played slot. He still played nickel. He still did a bunch of different things. And I just think he's got kind of an attitude and energy, all of those things that he's willing to do whatever it takes. And I think that's just infectious. And to get him back into that secondary, and I think that's why when you looked at how much of the nickel and dime and prowler that they played, he really is a big part of that. And that's not to downplay Johnny Dixon, who is also a huge part of that, and the safeties, because they have so many safeties who could do so many things, and Kalen King, who obviously, you're going to leave people out when you say that. But I just think that he's the one guy who kind of just does everything, and you could put him in so many spots, and he has that energy. And it was really, really important to get him back. He is one of those kind of linchpin guys over there, not the biggest guy, but what have we heard about him from the time he was recruited? He's a winner. He does things in a clutch. He makes plays when plays need to be made. And we started to see that in that Illinois game. And I also loved what Diaz did. I mean, Barry Looney, I think is how you pronounce it, the offensive coordinator for Illinois. I just think he coached circles around him. I mean, you had a quarterback who was completely out of whack, and they were able to pressure him just enough to force him into these throws and have all those playmaking DBs back there and those specialty packages, and they just made plays. Not to take away from Abdul Carter, who made a play, Dom DeLuca with another hit, making a big play. But you see who the playmakers on this defense are, and they're in that secondary. And if you're going to give Manny Diaz the opportunity to unleash all of those guys on you, you are going to be in a world of hurt. If you can't run the ball against this team, you're not going to beat this team. I'm just telling you right now. And that's why this game coming up against Iowa, the Michigan game coming up a little later, those are going to be the huge challenges. We thought we were going to see that from Illinois because we saw it a couple years ago, but they just didn't have what it took.
You think Cade McNamara is going to provide a steadier presence at quarterback than what they faced in Altmaier, who's a young quarterback, just transferred to that program this year. But still, we know what Iowa football is about in that matchup. They're going to want to establish themselves on the ground. And thus far, Manny Diaz's defense answering that call. I thought it was interesting because when you envision what the matchup versus Illinois might look like if you were to hold them to under 70 rushing yards, you're probably thinking a lot of big bodies out there stacking up linebackers and defensive linemen as much as you possibly can. They predominantly went with two and a half linebackers over the course of this game. They had Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs going 50-plus snaps, and we've kind of come to expect them as being mainstays there. But with all the defensive backs they were using in this matchup, Kobe King played about half of the snaps of those two fellow starters, and Dominic DeLuca was out there a bunch. So Daniel, maybe not the linebacker toll that we thought would maybe be required in this game. You and I both put a spotlight on Kobe King and said he's going to have to muscle up and show what he's about. Turned out that wasn't really the case in this game plan with that defensive back, the way they implemented things. But DeLuca now 30-plus snaps in both of the normal FBS opponent situations this year. He's well on his way toward surpassing that 200 snap total that he posted last year by maybe mid-season. Again, gets himself involved with a forced fumble. You saw Tony Rojas out there quite a bit. We saw Keon Wiley out there more than Tyler Elsdon for a second straight week. This room feels like it has the most opportunity to maneuver and maybe evolve between now and when they get into late October out of any group on the defensive field, I feel like.
Yeah, I think to start with Kobe King, he was someone that, that I thought that we would see a lot of, and that he would be put in some, pretty tough situations, in terms of the running game. But I think Hardy coming back had something to do with that, where when they went into the nickel package, King was the one who came off, leaving Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs as the two linebackers. I don't think we saw but maybe a handful of nickel snaps like that during the first two games of the year, which I think speaks to Hardy's role. and his impact there. And then I think, getting DeLuca onto the field, he's someone where we've talked about his athleticism, his ability to play out in space a little bit as that Sam. And I think by putting him out there, with Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter, you have a lot of athleticism there. I think you have some decent speed, and you have guys that make plays. I think that DeLuca coming in with that forced fumble in a big spot. We've seen what Abdul Carter can do. He had the interception, and then Curtis Jacobs is someone who can really be all over the place over the course of a game. So I think having DeLuca out there as the third linebacker, it tweaks some stuff around. When he's out there, it's not just in a second team type situation where you're rotating guys through. I think that he's someone that they see a really distinct role for. So I am very curious to see what this looks like moving forward. I think the note about Keon Wiley's snaps compared to Tyler Elsdon's is really interesting. In terms of getting Wiley on the field as a redshirt freshman, someone who's had to do a lot of physical development since he got to State College. So, it's a group that has a lot of eyes on it. And I think it's something where I thought that, going into the year in terms of the two deep and where guys were playing, I thought we had a pretty good handle on it based off of what we saw last year and what we saw during camp. But I think it really does speak to Manny Diaz's willingness to be flexible, mix and match his personnel a little bit, put different groups out there. And I think DeLuca is the type of player that can maybe force you to move things around a little bit.
And you got a couple of young guys, blue chip prospects who did the trip out to Illinois, stuck around campus, but that will be monitoring and Tamir Robinson, Kavion Keys as this year progresses. Physically, they're starting to look like they're where they need to be. They played against Delaware. DeLuca, though, what he's done this year: a sack against West Virginia, a pick six against Delaware, and then a forced fumble against Illinois, tying for the team lead in tackles. And oh, by the way, he's serving as a special teams captain, wearing that number 0. Redshirt freshman, former walk-on, now a certified two deep guy on defense. That's for sure. Maybe even more than that as his role continues to grow. Mark, I think I just wanted to get a little bit of housekeeping done on those travel notes. Caleb Artis and Ty Blaney were reserve defensive tackles that were brought out to Illinois. They didn't enter the game. Nittany Lions, for the first time this year, did not get some defensive snaps, but he was present with the team. So that kind of falls more into that yellow light category that James Franklin discussed. He entered the first.
I will say with Artis played on special teams. Artis
got
on the field goal team. So, and he was questionable on the pregame availability report, but we saw him warm up, and he's a member of that field goal protection team right now.
We also saw him wearing a mask walking into the stadium, so I wonder why he was questionable.
I'll give Daniel credit for that one, and also give Daniel credit for pointing out that Ty Blanding was on the field with this team during pregame warm-ups. A freshman.
I'll give Daniel credit. That's me.
That was all Brendan Cam.
Oh, that was Mark on Blanding. Okay, because Blanding was not on Penn State's official travel roster, so I apologize. Thank you, Mark.
In all seriousness, I just want to explain that because it's not about the credit. What happened was, I was recording the Brennan camp coming in, and Blanding is kind of a unique looking dude with the hair that kind of sticks up almost Don King style and a little lighter up top. And I thought I saw him. And then when we saw that he wasn't on the list, I went back and checked the Brennan camp. So at that point, Daniel was checking the field and saw him. And then I go back and check Brennan camp, and then we coordinate. I don't know that anybody else would care because frankly, we knew he wasn't going to play. But if you're going to get the details right, you might as well get the details right. And I'm glad that we were able to do that. So it turned out that they had Townley on the travel roster. And this wasn't anything where anybody was trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. These travel rosters are probably made on Fridays or Thursday night or whatever. And who knows what could come up. A kid might not be feeling well. They may have a late change of heart. So that's nothing. Don't be critical of anybody for that. But it was just one of those little things that changed. But Daniel did find the other one, didn't you? Who was the other kid who?
Mason Stahl was there, the walk-on wide receiver who played special teams. And I think that we figured out that Tyrese Mills was on the travel roster, but not there. And we saw Stahl in his spot, actually, I think, on the kickoff coverage team.
A collaborative effort. I was back here in Happy Valley correcting my my freshman who traveled to Illinois, headline from 9 to 10 because there were 10 freshmen involved there. By the way, just speaking of freshmen, Zion Tracy over a dozen snaps for the third consecutive game at cornerback. Clearly a guy who's earned a role on the football field. King Mack nearing 20 snaps for the second consecutive week at safety, someone that James Franklin spoke very highly of at his press conference last week. And Elliott Washington also getting involved at cornerback. All three of those players pathways to the field on special teams too. Let's jump over to the offense. We spent a lot of time here on the defense. I think that was deserved. We spent a lot of time on the offense in the post-game show because in post-game show, I feel like we tend to nitpick a little bit more. We tend to go with the raw emotion, and the raw emotion when you were surveying Penn State fans was about the offense on Saturday, Mark. A lot of that was about the inability to find any kind of balance. It wasn't just that they got one facet going and then the other couldn't. It was they couldn't run the football for about 3 quarters or almost 3 quarters. Drew Aller was never really able to slice and dice in any kind of form like we saw the first couple of weeks. He ended up just below a 50% passing on the day, just over 200 yards throwing, no touchdowns, but no turnovers. And, James Franklin called it a pretty win. And I think in some ways he was also called Drew Aller's performance pretty because there was no turnovers and there weren't a lot of, don't do that Drew moments.
Yeah, I'll go back to I touched on it a little bit earlier, but again, I mean, he didn't win a game, but he didn't lose the game. And listen, some of the receivers didn't do him any favors either. I mean, Malik McClain gets an opportunity to start because Trey Wallace is bumped up and drops the second pass of the game that Aller throws right to him and drops it. And then early in the third quarter, you're able to you're trying to get things going, coming out with the ball in the third quarter, and same thing. I mean, just a gimme pass that he doesn't catch. So you look at Aller's number, 16 to 33. That's at least a couple more. They wouldn't have been for big yardage. I was a little surprised with the offense that they didn't take more deep shots. And again, I think it's clear now that they're erring on the side of caution. There was one play where Keandre Lambert-Smith was wide open down the sideline. And for some reason, Aller's eyes just didn't go there, And listen, it's easy for us in the press box to see it. It's easy for people on TV to see it. When you have that Nelson kid and all these other people running at you, I'm not saying that's an easy thing, but that's a play that he's going to make as he gets more comfortable. I just think it shows you that that play to me was kind of a microcosm that I think they are focusing more on those short and intermediate zones, and that's one of the reasons why they're not really turning the ball over. We had that stat going into this game where they had one pass that covered more than 20 yards, and the Illinois in the first 2 games, and that was the long touchdown catch and run to Keandre Lambert-Smith. And I don't know that there was more than one in this game. The Illinois stats are a little different, but the long pass, relatively long pass to Liam Clifford traveled more than 20, but I'm not sure there were many more that traveled more than 20 yards in the air. So to me, they're kind of playing it safe with Drew Aller, and I just wonder at what point they're going to feel the need to just let it rip a little bit. I'm not suggesting that they should do it, just rely solely on that because clearly it's been effective. What they're doing has been effective, and I think even though that was a difficult game, I think he's still progressing. So no need to necessarily mess with a good thing. But I think at some point along the line, they're going to catch some people with some deep balls. I mean, it's going to happen because he can't throw it long.
Penn State was dealing with one of the best individual defensive line performances that you'll probably find in the Big Ten this entire year. And it happened very early in the season by Johnny Newton
not Nelson.
And I don't want to shortchange the rest of the Illinois front 7, particularly the defensive line, which brought it that day. But Newton was a virtuoso in what he was able to do on the field. I think you talk to a lot of people on both sides of the ball. They'll tell you that about the Illinois defensive linemen. But overall, I think the story for this Penn State offensive line was, they kind of rolled up their sleeves and said, let's let our lead guys go to work. Daniel, that meant Olu Fashanu didn't come to the sideline much. That meant Hunter Norzad didn't come to the sideline much until late. We saw Sal Wormley essentially not leave the field. We did see Drew Shelton get involved. We saw Vega Ioane play a bunch of football, and I think he continues to look more and more comfortable comfortable does Ioane in his role. And what did you make of this collaborative effort by the offensive line, which went 7 deep for the most part? Nick Dawkins, Dominic got involved later when this game was out of hand. We thought they would start to really tighten things up. That's what they did. They front loaded a lot of their starters for the first time this year. And naturally you're going up against a guy like Newton. That's a tough day's work. But what did you make of the end result?
Yeah, I think that this really showed how the offensive line is going to look in competitive games this year. I know that there is some, kind of talk about what's going on with Olu. Seeing him over on the sideline and talking about keeping him on that quote unquote pitch count. But last week James Franklin said that it's in games, it's situational how long he plays, and this was a situation where you needed your all American left tackle in the game for as much as you could. So I think that this is what it's going to look like, in action when things get going. You've got going 7 deep. I think is probably where you want it, and I think that Drew Shelton and Vanga Ioane can play and have shown they can play. So, and I feel like James Franklin feels like they deserve to play. And so I think you'll continue to see them at different spots. I mean, those interior linemen really did have their hands full with Newton over the course of Saturday. It's going to be hard to see, I think, a similar performance by someone like that again this year. But I think that this offensive line that you saw on Saturday is going to be the one that we're really seeing moving forward, barring any injuries. And I think that it's probably what James Franklin wanted, that they got out of the game with the win, but they come with lots of things to improve on, lots of coaching points. And, I think that, I think that's just in a good spot right now. I think that seeing this offensive line over the course of playing, more than 3 quarters together, getting a better idea of the rotations, I think we know kind of what Penn State has right now.
I think what I like is they've only given up 2 sacks on the season. They've been in scramble mode. Olu played 50% of the snaps the first couple of weeks. They were getting a long look at a lot of different guys. You had 2 quarterbacks getting extended looks, and the guy that's starting, you really want to make him feel comfortable and work his way into some momentum as a college quarterback. And he'd be able to do that. I think Drew Aller has taken some shots that aren't reflected on the sack sheet, but I think overall, especially this game against Illinois, I wondered, there were moments where Aller started to look more like a kid, what you can expect at his age with his lack of experience. He looked in command the first 2 home games with the way he was doing things, but it never really teetered on the brink of him losing his control as the orchestrator of this offense, the conductor. Whereas you saw on the other side of the field, the guy in Luke Altmaier, who's been in college football longer, not the prospect pedigree, but Lane Kiffin recruited him to Ole Miss, relatively inexperienced, and you saw what happened when the wheels started to slide off the track. Drew Aller's got a lot more of a supporting cast to back him up in Big Ten play than does Altmaier, but I thought that was a really good sign where Drew Aller didn't let maybe the potential emotions and the mental pressure of that situation build up on him when that game was getting dicey. Thought he responded well, responded under control, even though it wasn't a lot of points, a fireworks kind of day. I like that result. But I think the big question that we all have, and Mark, Daniel, and I spent some time on the podcast, post-game podcast, discussing this, is at receiver. What happens next? You've got Tyler Warren developing momentum at tight end. We all know Theo Johnson could break out with a big game at any given time. Now, Keandre Lambert-Smith has been your lead guy at receiver. I think we got a feel for just how valuable Harrison Wallace might be when he was off the field. He traveled to Illinois. He warmed up with the team. He did not go. You also were without Malik Mega, so that impacts you to some extent. A ton of work for Malik McLean, as you said, had some struggles bringing the football in early, some miscommunication it appeared early as well. And then you had other guys getting involved, Liam Clifford, Dante's, Caden Saunders, I thought, flashed with relatively low snap count. But we're still working our way through this thing. Omari Evans, didn't have any kind of noisy day. He was on the field again. We got a lot of names still, and I'm not sure we know exactly where the top 4 or 5 that you can lean on when you get into the fourth quarter against the Ohio States and Michigans of the world, which once again, we just keep coming back to. When you measure up any team or any component of this Penn State offense or defense, you keep saying, well, how does it stack up against the best of the best you're going to face if you want to get to that Big Ten championship game?
I would say right now, the biggest issue at receiver, they got to get Keandre Lambert-Smith his head on his shoulders. I mean, that personal foul, that's the kind of thing that can lose you a game. I mean, it really could. That guy he is going to be an NFL receiver. I think we're seeing how good he is. Okay. And maybe it's me nitpicking, but I'm just telling you, you saw what happened in the course of that game. That took a 3rd and 2 to a 3rd and 17. And now all of a sudden you end up getting a field goal blocked and you're up 13-0, and a team that was dead in the water marches right down the field. In the end, did it matter? Not in that game. But that guy is too good. He's too good. He has too much talent to let that sort of thing get the best of him. So we can talk about everything with the receivers. He needs to be the guy. Like, he needs to be the guy that's solid and consistent, and he is that, but he's got to keep his emotions in check. Now let's get to the other receivers. Malik McClain had an opportunity, and he didn't come through. You hate to be overly critical of college players, but I don't know how many of those chances you're going to get to start a game, and when you get it, you really have to come through. So hopefully he's able to put that in the rearview mirror and rebound from it. I really liked what I saw from Caden Saunders. I mean, he to me, fielding punts. So we were talking about that he was doing just a great job catching the punt. And I don't think that's the easiest thing to do. And now we started to see him show a little bit of that wiggle, a little bit of that escapability, and do some things there. And then they worked him into the passing game. And I think he's going to be a guy that we see more and more and more of. And I also like the fact that when Malik McClain struggled, we saw more of Cephas at that outside position. That's maybe not the most natural position, but why do I like that? Because Cephas is a guy who can play multiple spots. And if you have that kind of Swiss Army knife, that if you need him in the slot, he's going to go there and do some things. If you need him outside, he's going to go there and do some things. So those are the guys that I'm really keeping an eye on. What I liked a lot about this game, though, is that they started to really work the running backs into the passing game. And yes, one of them is a short dink to Singleton that he turns into a longer gain. But at the end of the day, he ends up being your leading receiver yardage-wise. And then they came this close to having a little, excellent touch pass from Aller going to Katron Allen for a touchdown. I think that would have been a really good catch for a running back to make. And I think maybe as the season goes on, maybe Katron makes that. But to be able to work those guys in, and as you mentioned, the tight ends they're starting to work in, I think all that stuff is going to take care of itself. But I just think I'll go back to what I said. I think a guy like Keandre Lambert-Smith, he's a leader on this team. He's the leader in that room. And you need your leader to set the right example. What I did like is when Aller missed him, you didn't see anything. You didn't see him. You didn't see negativity out of him. He just, he ran a deep route. He was open. The ball didn't get to him, and he just ran around and went to the sideline to get a little bit of a break because he ran a deep route. So that part of it I really liked. But the shoving and the yelling and stuff, he's got to get rid of that.
I know that's something that James Franklin vowed that they would get cleaned up this week. Obviously not something you want popping up when a game is really hanging in the balance. And at that point, the Lambert-Smith penalty, it felt like it could have been a moment you point back to and said, that is the moment when I think started to unravel for Penn State. They were able to kind of nip that in the bud and never got to that point, but you felt that narrative starting to brew. Tyler Calvaruso is waiting in the wings. He's going to take over in just a second to talk about recruiting. But Daniel, I do want to focus on just a little bit more offensively. And I guess this is more really also attached to just some questions we have moving forward. What do you think about the passing game and the momentum that guys are looking to establish? Because it's Keandre Lambert-Smith has been consistent. Harrison Wallace had that start, 10 catches through 2 games. And then all of a sudden, poof, he's not available. We'll see what his status looks like on the practice field Wednesday. But I was surprised to see just now that you go work your way through the receiver room. Dante Cephas is next up. Him and Malik McClain both have 71 receiving yards. And we just haven't seen the tight end room burst in a way that we thought and we know they're capable of doing. So if you kind of had to say, where is that momentum most likely to be found as Drew Aller navigates this kind of cluster of targets and talent, who's your money on right now coming through the 3-game sample size? I know that we're not going to hold you to it, but I'm just curious where you see the trends.
I mean, I think we're probably due for a Theo Johnson breakout at some point. He came close. I think on there's one play where if Aller hits him, it might be a touchdown. But I thought that Tyler Warren looked really good. These past 2 weeks, he's looked really good. We know that for most of last season, he was dealing with something that maybe limited him a little bit. But I thought that he's just looked very, very solid these past 2 weeks, and he's been kind of a good security blanket for Drew Aller on some of these plays. Speaking of a security blanket, I think that that's kind of where what Penn State was missing without Trey Wallace on Saturday. Which I think after that opener, I made the comment that it was a Parker Washington type stat line, and we saw Parker Washington as kind of that guy that Sean Clifford, everyone's covered. He's going to look for Washington underneath. Maybe he makes something happen. It's a role that I don't think we expected to see Trey Wallace in based on what we'd heard about him and the book on him athletically. So I think that maybe, we're learning about his impact and his role in this offense a little bit more. But I think Cephas is in a good, I think Cephas and Saunders, and I guess Liam Clifford too, even though Clifford's started and been the top slot. I think that those three guys are really in a good position to, move forward, and maybe move up a little bit. Clifford, we saw him make just a great catch on that deep ball. He's someone that it seems like Penn State has a lot of respect for, the coaching staff, and that his teammates have a lot of respect for him too. And he's someone that will probably do everything right while he's out there. But like Mark said, Caden Saunders has a little bit of wiggle out there. I think that he's someone that by getting him those reps, catching those punts, I think that the comfort there can translate over to wide receiver. And then Cephas, I think that, he wasn't here in the spring. He really had to dive in this fall. And I think that maybe he's going to start to get a little bit more comfortable. I do think that he's someone that Aller hasn't been afraid to look to, over these first couple of weeks. So I think the more action that Cephas gets, the more you can get him up to that Big Ten speed, coming up from the MAC. I think that really bodes well for him. But I think that at some point, I predicted it in my bold predictions that we were going to see the big Aller game this weekend, which we did not see. But I think that that's still something that is brewing. I think that guys like Theo Johnson, maybe someone like Harrison Wallace, maybe, even Liam Clifford could have a big stat line, make some plays, and really get this offense going. But, on the other hand, Penn State hasn't really needed that yet. And I think that that's a really good sign too, when you talk about balance, when you talk about having a well-rounded team, and being able to play deep into this year.
And deep into games, we just haven't needed to throw the ball in pressure-packed situations. Drew Aller has 2 pass completions in the fourth quarter of games this year, and that's not because he's been bad in the fourth quarter. It's because he hasn't thrown the ball really in the fourth quarter. So that's a part of this team and a part of this game that when you need to throw the football, whether you're trying to play catch-up or you're going against the clock, we've seen it in some 2-minute work late in the half, but that's something that we'll see more of as these games get tighter. Mark, let's finish with special teams. Where are we through 3 games? I mean, Alex Felkins feels like he's made his case in the last couple games. The block, I know that he took part of the blame from that with Daniel, which is good to hear the accountability. But at the end of the day, Sanders Zahadak, aside from 1 extra point, hasn't resurfaced from his second half time out in the season opener. And meanwhile, another scholarship investment that you had coming out of high school, Alex Paqueta, isn't on the travel roster. And this is a guy that we projected as the number 3 punter based on the conversations that we've had and some practice observations. But these are very, very valuable scholarship spots. And look, I don't want to pretend to know if Alex Paqueta may be dealing with something injury related, but based on what we heard going into the season, this is kind of where he was stacking up against the other punters. Gabe Nwasu, who's kickoff specialist, is the number 2 punter. Riley Thompson, who's coming from Florida Atlantic, has been the starting punter, but I think there's been something left to be desired in that role as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also points out that when you're Penn State, you're going to have the luxury of recruiting over these players. Well, it's not even a luxury. It's a necessity now, right? Because imagine had they not gone out and gotten those players who, for whatever reason, the transfers have beaten out the scholarship guys. And I think we know this coaching staff well enough. We're not in practice, but these guys, they're not playing favorites or anything. They're seeing who's doing the best job, and that's who they're going with. So, Yeah, I mean, what kind of pressure does that put on some of the young scholarship guys? I guess that's something that they have to kind of process themselves internally. With respect to Felkins, I don't think he's done anything to lose the job. I think you can question why they would go for a 52-yarder there. And the more I thought about it, the more maybe the coaching staff felt pretty good about where they were in that game, and that there will be a game when you're going to need one of those late. And is that kid going to be up for it? And it just seemed like a low kick. And but otherwise, I think he's done fine. The punting game, one of those was deflected, so that was another thing that kind of you look at, and these are the kind of things that really can't happen if you're in a tight game. These little things. So I think overall on special teams, Stacey Collins has to get a lot of this stuff buttoned up. You've been fortunate enough that it's not had a major impact on you yet. I will say, and I touched on it before, they start to pick up those hidden yards in the return game. And I really like that, because that's not always an easy thing to do in the Big Ten, where teams have learned how to directional kick. And most of the kickoff specialists, you may not get an opportunity because, like Gabe, they're going to blast it into the end zone. But when you get those chances, I liked what I saw from Singleton. And I'll tell you what, I know that a couple weeks ago, what my bold prediction was that Caden Saunders was going to break a punt for a punt return for a TD, and he didn't do it. But I think that guy's been rock solid back there. I think he's been as good as they've had in a while. And I like the fact that, okay, he's got the basic part down, catching it, which is, I'm just telling you, folks, it's not easy. I tried to catch one out on the field with nobody out there one time and made a complete idiot of myself. That's a pretty low bar to be measured against. But what he's doing with people right in his face, that's impressive. But then to be able to break a few of those, and listen, you don't have to break them long. Even if you get 9, 10, 15 yards, whatever you're able to get, those are the hidden yards that are going to come back and just mean big things for you in the course of tight games.
Yeah, I've been with the program that had a first-time punt returner get a couple chances in a conference matchup, and he fumbled both of them and cost the team a possession deep in territory. One of those, if you make a good point, though, the opposing special teams players getting their ball on not one kick of yours, but 2 kicks of yours over the course of this game on the road in the Big Ten, where your offense isn't really able to find that balance or able to find those explosive plays. It's fortunate, and when you think about all that this defense did what it did against the Fighting Illini on Saturday, to come away where you're actually pulling Drew Aller early in the fourth quarter and getting him over to the sideline. Fellas, appreciate the coverage. Daniel will have a rewind look over at Illinois matchup, one final kind of work way through that one. Daniel, look forward to that read. We'll be back with you on Tuesday coming out of James Franklin's press conference. We'll also have more on this Iowa matchup from the Hawkeyes perspective. Talk to you both soon.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks, Tyler.
All right, let's jump into it with Tyler Calvaruso now, our resident recruiting expert, to break down what's happening with this Whiteout guest list as we get a little closer to the 7:30 Saturday night kickoff. But first and foremost, how you doing, Tyler? You were on the road this weekend. We're going to get into that in a second, but I hope you had fun out there.
Oh, I definitely did, man. I'm doing great. I mean, we got a busy week ahead of us, so can't ask for anything more.
We had 2 of the premier high school programs in the entire region, really the entire United States, going toe-to-toe on Friday night. Don Bosco Prep, a perennial powerhouse out of North Jersey, and then you have St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia. Obviously a place where Penn State would love to hammer with recruits every single year. It's been a bit of an uphill battle for them in recent years, but we got a lot of names to cover in that matchup. Generally speaking, St. Joe's handled its business. They won pretty convincingly.
They did, and I mean, it was 28-7 final score. St. Joe's, it wasn't its best performance, and head coach Tom Long, he let them know after the game. There were a bunch of turnovers. There's a lot of sloppy play. So it could have been a lot wider of a margin final score-wise, but it was clear who the better team was. And, Don Bosco's just young this year. It's one of those years where they're a little bit younger, and St. Joe's is loaded on both sides of the ball. And fortunately, I got the chance to see multiple Penn State targets for both programs. Don Bosco has Marquette Dorsey in the secondary. He had a couple of nice plays in coverage throughout the night. And, St. Joe's kind of stayed away from him. And I think that's the right call, given the kind of player Dorsey is. He was getting the job done in coverage. And then on the St. Joe's side, man, I mean, it's kind of just like a laundry list. You got top 24/7 defensive lineman Maxwell Roy. You've got Anthony Saka, the top 24/7 linebacker in Penn State legacy. You got Cam Smith, another top 24/7 linebacker in his first season at St. Joe's Prep after transferring from Salem High in South Jersey. You got running back Isaiah West, who's a 2025 prospect, and he's going to be at the Whiteout this weekend. Khalil Stewart made the move over from Roman Catholic to St. Joe's for his junior season, and he looked good against Don Bosco's defensive front, which features Georgia commit Jordan Thomas. So there was some beef in that trenches, and Stewart was holding its own. So it was a good matchup to get out and see. And, we gained a lot of insight into where some recruitments are trending as well, specifically on the St. Joe's Prep side.
Yeah, not only did you get a chance to get eyes on these really fantastic prospects, but you got a chance to discuss and get some ears on the situation with where their recruitments are heading. And with St. Joe's, you always know what you're going to get going to cover one of their games, a litany of Power 5 prospects. I know the first time I covered them, I was thinking about this the other night on Thursday night because he was running wild in Philadelphia again with the Eagles. But DeAndre Swift was the biggest show in town with St. Joe's Prep. One of the first times I went there. This time you could make a case for a few guys, but let's start with Maxwell Roy, one of the premier 2025 linemen on either side of the football in the state of Pennsylvania, a guy that we got a chance to see in State College this summer during that Elite 11 showcase that also had an auxiliary camp going on with some positional prospects. Where does he stand with Penn State? Because this is one where you think, okay, Deion Barnes, defensive line coach, Philly guy, he's going to be front and center in this entire conversation.
See, before I get into Maxwell Roy real quick, I just want to bring up one quick thing because you mentioned DeAndre Swift. His dad was actually on the sidelines with St. Joe's Prep on Friday.
You can't miss his dad. You can't miss DeAndre Swift's dad. I mean, is he still the biggest guy on the sideline?
Yeah, man. He's awesome. I got the chance to catch up with him for a few, and that's one proud father right there. But going back to Maxwell Roy, the big thing with him is he's going to be at the Whiteout this weekend, and that's the only visit that he has locked in right now. Really, mainly his process, he's trying to focus on, what feels right for him and his family, how they feel coming out of these St. Joe's Prep games. That's kind of going to dictate which campuses he gets to moving forward. But St. Joe's Prep doesn't have a game this week. It has a bye week. So Roy is getting the chance to hit the road for the first time in a while, and Penn State is going to be his destination. Now, I think this recruitment is kind of interesting in the sense that Roy, despite being a high caliber prospect, he hasn't been a ton of places yet. His recruitment has kind of been more of the slow developing variety. So I want to see how things play out once he gets on the road a little bit more and makes visits beyond Penn State, because he was last in town in May. This is going to be another visit for him. I want to see what happens when he gets on the road, checks out some of the other Big Ten programs involved in his recruitment. There's a lot of Big Ten suitors for Maxwell Roy. SEC involvement as well. He was telling me Alabama starting to sniff around, so that's obviously something to keep a pretty close eye on. So I think Penn State has helped itself with Roy. I think they've put in a lot of good work with him early. I think he's comfortable with the staff. It also helps in the Lions that they have Gabe Infante, who used to be the head coach of St. Joe's Prep. There's still a connection there, and those guys, part of that program, they feel the connection with Infante. That was something he mentioned to me. So that works in Penn State's favor. So I think Penn State has done all it really can with Roy so far. Again, want to see what happens when he hits the road for other visits, but I also want to see what happens coming out of this Whiteout visit, because he's really excited about getting in this atmosphere. Oh my God, I can't talk. This atmosphere, not only as a Penn State, recruit, but as a college football fan. He was telling me that this Whiteout atmosphere is something that he's really, really looking forward to taking in person.
Well, when St. Joe's Prep has a weekend off, there's a lot of schools saying, hey, this is your chance. Come see us. So this is a big deal. Georgia has offered, you mentioned Alabama, mounting interest from them, Michigan, Ohio State, Southern Cal, all of those programs on that list for Maxwell Roy. So it says a lot about where he is. He's the number 10 defensive lineman in 2025 rankings at 24/7 Sports. Naturally, if you go every level of this defense, you're going to find players. Let's go to the linebacker unit, and it's a familiar name for Penn State fans. Anthony Saka, really impressive. Number 23 overall at the linebacker spot in our rankings at 24/7 Sports, a top 200 overall prospect. And yet he keeps staying away from Happy Valley. We talked about the connections, the family ties. We didn't see him around this summer when we saw a lot of other players coming through. We did see him a couple summers ago. I remember working the camp circuit. Can you explain kind of where things are based on what you had the chance to converse on Friday night?
Yeah, and before diving into his recruitment, this was my first chance getting the opportunity to see him play And man, I was really, really impressed. I mean, his athleticism is there, but I think what really stands out about Anthony Saka is his football IQ and his instincts. I mean, he was snuffing out plays basically at the line, and he was ahead of the curve. He was all over the place during the first half. He had a lot of tackles, man. He's just going sideline to sideline. So I was really impressed. And, the recruitment, it's in an interesting spot because, yeah, he hasn't been back to Penn State in a little while, and he doesn't really have any hard plans to make it back this fall. So he's going to be at Notre Dame this weekend. He's going to be out in South Bend for the Notre Dame-Ohio State game. That is a matchup he has had his eye on for a while. And Notre Dame is in a pretty good spot with Salk. I mean, Al Golden being on Marcus Freeman's staff, those two have a really good relationship. Salk's father and Al Golden were close in college, so that goes back decades. And there's a lot of comfort there. He trusts Marcus Freeman. He just really likes Notre Dame's defensive coaching staff. So I think that's a pretty big element in this recruitment. Wisconsin is another program that he's given a look. Some of that is his St. Joe's Prep teammate Emilio Agard being committed to the Badgers. So he's looking at making it out to Madison the next time Agard makes that trip. But new staff is basically what he was telling me. He wants to give those guys a chance. He feels that they've done well enough in his recruitment to warrant that kind of in-person consideration. So now Penn State fans are hearing all this, and I didn't even mention when he might be making it back to campus. So don't be too concerned because he's looking at doing it in the winter. And he told me that during the stretch run of his recruitment, when he sits down and he formulates his official visit schedule, Penn State is going to get one. So, yes, I understand that, the staff hasn't gotten a ton of face time with him recently, and he hasn't been in State College. He hasn't been around the program and, the program's commits and just in the atmosphere of the program. But he reaffirmed to me that Penn State is in a good spot in his recruitment. And, the contact is there. The comfort with the staff is there. And he's going to be back. It's really just a matter of when. It's probably not going to happen this fall, but in the winter is what he's looking at. And Michigan is another program that he's looking to check out in the winter as well. So, we gained a lot of insight into where Anthony Salka's recruitment is at right now, which was probably one of the highlights of the night for me.
Well, all that is great, and it's good insight, but I don't think it's going to give a lot of our listeners who wear the Penn State hat warm and fuzzies about where his recruitment stands. He is the number 5 prospect in the state of Pennsylvania by a 24/7 sports assessment. As I said, Maxwell Roy, a teammate of his, is number 2 on that list. Cameron Smith is number 3 on the list. He was previously playing in South Jersey, a 4-star linebacker. Now, he made the move to St. Joe's Prep. Is he out there? Is he involved? And how is that looking so far?
Yeah, he was looking pretty good out there. I saw a lot of the athleticism that has been talked up with Cam Smith. You could definitely see that athletically the profile is there, and he belongs as a top 24/7 prospect. He definitely showed that to me. Recruitment-wise, no visits planned right now. He was talking to me a lot about Penn State, though, and really his affinity for Manny Diaz and the scheme that Penn State runs defensively. And he really appreciates all of his communication with the Penn State coaching staff. He's really just, we hear from him. They wish him luck on his games, but he really appreciates that they just encourage him to be who he is as a player, trust his instincts, use his athleticism to his advantage. He carries that with him out onto the field on Friday night. So that's something that he has appreciated. Rutgers is the other program that he mentioned to me is probably the most involved right now. The New Jersey native, they're trying to get him back to the Garden State to play his ball. Michigan is involved as well. But it seems like right now it's Penn State and Rutgers kind of standing out the most. I think Michigan is definitely firmly in that race as well. But no visits coming up. He's working through that. This seems to be a theme with the St. Joe's Prep players. Their schedules are pretty hectic. They play a lot of Saturday games, so they're kind of trying to figure out when they could fit these visits in. He's not going to be anywhere this weekend, but I'd expect him back out on the road sooner rather than later. And Penn State is in line to get another visit at some point, whether that be later in the fall or possibly even this winter. But he's definitely planning on being back in town. And another guy on St. Joe's Prep who I was impressed with.
Yeah, 3 defenders right there, all of them just juniors, all of them considered top 5 prospects in the state of Pennsylvania for that 2025 cycle. Before we shift gears and start looking at that whiteout guest list a little bit more, one other name I wanted to pick your brain on at St. Joe's Prep because he was one of my favorites, and I would say probably one of our favorites generally at Lions 24/7 on the summer camp scene here in Happy Valley, was Alexander Haskell, a guy that just brought a tremendous motor, and you could see the skills developing just his camp by camp when we got him here in the summer. You already knew it. Well, he was an impact freshman for a team like St. Joe's Prep. He's going to be a big time player. By the time he started that sophomore season, Penn State had offered him. So have other Power 5 schools. what stood out in your live evaluation? I saw from you a tweet, or I guess we're calling them an X, of him picking up a sack. So I guess he did make some noise out there in a big-time matchup.
He did. He was applying pressure. That was a pretty big sack. That came on a 4th down after a St. Joe's Prep turnover. Don Bosco was driving a little bit. They got into a situation where they had to go for it on 4th, and Haskell got to Don Bosco quarterback Devin Sisler and forced a turnover on downs with a pretty solid sack. He looked good getting after the passer. St. Joe's runs a lot of 3-4, so sometimes he's not on the field. But when they go multiple and they run that 4-3 and they tell him to put his hand in the dirt and get after the quarterback, he's pretty good. I mean, think about it. And this was something that stood out to us about him when he was still a freshman, not even a sophomore, that physically, I mean, the way he tests and just the way he's built and so young and so early in his high school career, it's really impressive. And I think there's a high ceiling there. But I liked his pass rush ability. I think that he's not just – I think he's still, learning some finesse moves and trying to kind of outsmart opposing tackles. But physically, he's where he needs to be. That was the main thing that stood out to me, getting my eyes on him in person in pads for the first time. His size is legit, man, and he uses his strength to his advantage. When he gets engaged with the tackle and he's got to, kind of put his head down and fight through a block, he's got the strength to do so, and he did it multiple times on Friday night.
Well, we saw him this summer, 6'3" and growing, 230 pounds and growing. But what I liked about him was just that bend at this size and the addition and that length. I mean, he was able to really, in some of that drill work, use that length to his advantage, the leverage, and you just don't necessarily see those traits popping up for a guy who's got 1 year of high school ball under his belt. Of course, when that 1 year of high school ball is you being a depth piece for a team like St. Joe's Prep, that's a pretty good experience. Great stuff from there. I know you'll probably have more on some of these guys over at Lions247.com. You've already had some content coming to the site. Maxwell Roy was our nice appetizer on Saturday morning, the update there before we got into our game coverage. So good stuff from you getting out there. I know you'll be on other high school fields all fall long. Let's dive into this Whiteout guest list, which is growing by the moment, it seems. I know Brian Doan contributing with another top 100 confirmation. And let's begin with that name because it's a familiar one for Penn State. And this is a spot where safety Anthony Poindexter has been able to pluck a lot of talent.
Familiar one for Penn State and a really familiar one for our listeners at this point with how often his name has popped up in the last month alone. Kanoa Winston, the cousin of KJ Winston. He's going to be back for the Whiteout. He was in town for the season opener against West Virginia. Really loved that visit. It was his first game visit. Loved the atmosphere. Loved getting back around the staff and, just kind of hearing what they have to say. It's been a consistent message to him. We want you here and, this is the place we think that you need to be. So the fact that he's making it again, it's pretty telling. I think I said that actually coming out of his West Virginia visit that he didn't have any visits planned at that time. But if he did make it back to Penn State for the Whiteout or even for another visit later on in the fall, it was kind of indicative of where his mind is at. And now it's coming to fruition. He was at Rutgers over the weekend. I think that visit went pretty well, reading some of the feedback when he caught up with Brian Doan. But I think the Scarlet Knights are on his radar to some degree as well. And, I mean, he's a top 100 prospect who's got a lot of intriguing offers, and there's a lot of interest beyond the region as well. But it seems like Penn State is catching his eye the most right now. I think the Nittany Lions are going to have another opportunity to continue solidifying itself on his list. Coming out of the Whiteout, I mean, really, if he loved the West Virginia atmosphere, I think he's going to love this Whiteout atmosphere. And I think that's a big selling point for him.
And game by game, his cousin KJ really solidifying his status as a marquee member of this defensive backfield, which is an impressive unit that he in year two has risen toward the top of. Winston, by the way, Kanoa Winston, number 93 overall in the rankings for 2025 class at 24/7 Sports, the number 8 safety at Gonzaga, which is a big-time prep program in Washington, D.C. Someone making the long-distance trip that we've talked about before, and this will be his second visit in a pretty short span, is Dylan Battle, a 2025 defensive lineman out of Texas. He was up here for the Lash Bash. Thought it went well enough to start coordinating the next trip. So he's getting the Whiteout. I mean, we're talking about a kid in Texas. By the time he's a month or a half into that junior season, he'll already have that lashback experience under his belt and the Whiteout experience. And I think you'll have a pretty good vibe for where you stand with Dylan Battle long-term coming off of this.
Yeah, and this was actually there was an interesting visit that popped up to me when you locked it down with that confirmation with that he was going to be making it to campus, because that July Lash Bash visit, Deion Barnes, when he was down in Texas during the spring, that's when he issued that offer to Dylan Battle. And, that Lash Bash visit was kind of his real introduction to Penn State, getting around the staff. It was also Penn State's real introduction to him, getting more comfortable with him. So that was one of those visits where it was a lot of the two sides, feeling each other out, kind of, trying to establish where the interest is and how both sides mesh. And they did mesh, and he's going to be making it back for this whiteout, which was something that he had circled coming out of the Lash Bash visit, mainly because, again, we're going to harp on the atmosphere a lot this week. And I know it's a huge talking point about the whiteout every single year. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these kids, especially the ones who aren't from the region, right? Because when Penn State gets involved with a kid from Texas or just really anywhere in the Midwest, and they're not from the Northeast and they don't have easy access to State College, if they want to visit Penn State, they kind of circle this whiteout because they hear about all the hype with the whiteout and the atmosphere inside Beaver Stadium and everything that comes along with the whiteout visit experience. And a lot of guys, if they're really high on the Nittany Lions and they want to get to campus, this is the time to do it. So Battle is one of the many non-region guys making it back. And I think, if all goes well, I think Penn State will be solidified as one of the top contenders in his recruitment moving forward. I know the staff has its eye on his junior season film. They're trying to, see how things play out for him, but all encouraging on that front so far. And Battle will be in town. So he's looking to have a good visit, and he's looking to get more comfortable with the staff and the time that he gets with them while he's in town.
Another player from outside of Pennsylvania, but not quite as far away. I'll go down to Virginia for a 4-star linebacker, a top 24/7 prospect out of Culpeper, Virginia, and Brett Clatterbaugh. This guy, he's got all the size that you're looking for. He really has impressed, I think, and I certainly would fit the mold, in my opinion, of what Manny Diaz is seeking for in a box linebacker.
I definitely agree with that assessment. You throw on his tape and you can kind of see one of the things that jumps out to is, oh, wow, this is a guy who would probably do pretty well in a Manny Diaz defense. That kind of defense where, he can move, he's athletic, he can drop in coverage, and he plays with some ferocity, man. That kid attacks and he hits hard. He's a really good player. And, I talk about Dylan Battle kind of having his eye on that whiteout visit since July. I think Clatterbaugh has been talking about visiting for the whiteout since, May, June. We've known about this one for a while, and he's going to be making it back for the first time in a little bit. His offer from the Nittany Lions came after a standout camp performance last summer. So that's when he really jumped onto the staff's radar. And now he is firmly entrenched on the Power 5 radar with multiple opportunities. He's one of those 2025 backers who, he's a little bit higher on the board, that's for sure. There are a lot of intriguing names on that 2025 linebacker board. We've talked about plenty on this show alone with the St. Joe's Prep kids. Clatterbaugh's another regional prospect that Manny Diaz and the staff are giving a really long look. So he'll be back. And again, another opportunity for a recruit who was already pretty interested in the Nittany Lions to get more comfortable with the staff and, again, wants to get in that whiteout atmosphere.
One more 2025 name to get to, and when it's a quarterback, you're always a little bit more intrigued. And Malik Washington has been up to camp. He was at the Elite 11 camp event also that took place at State College, and is going to get more familiar with this program now by making his latest trip up to campus. What do we make of Malik Washington and his status on this 2025 quarterback board? Clearly, he's someone who's within your regional wheelhouse, but this is a team that likes to recruit that position coast to coast when they can.
As this week goes on and we kind of get beyond just the list itself and we start diving into each recruit and, the level of interest those recruits have in Penn State and how high they are on Penn State's board, Malik Washington is going to be a name that we keep coming back to because at this point in the cycle, he is one of, if not the top quarterback target for Penn State. And you're kind of starting to see his recruitment pick up a little bit. As a sophomore at Archbishop Spalding, he was his first year as a starter. He was kind of more focused on getting settled in than he was making a lot of visits. But, he was at Maryland over the weekend. Now he's going to be at Penn State. So you're starting to see things pick up a little bit for him. His process is starting to heat up. This is a big visit for Penn State. Washington has been around. He got the offer from a camp performance. He made it back to campus while he was in town for that Elite 11 regional in May. So he's garnered, some familiarity with the staff at this point. They're definitely really, really excited to get him back on campus. And look, as this 2025 quarterback board plays out, Washington is going to be a name that remains very, very close to the top. He's got the, we kind of talk about, Mike Yurch is going after quarterbacks who are maybe a little bit more refined than Washington is at this point in his development, but his athletic profile is elite. I mean, you guys saw it last summer when he camped, and you guys got to see him test. I mean, athletically, he's one of the better athletes at quarterback in the 2025 class, in my opinion. I think definitely, I got the chance to see him in his first career start last season at Don Bosco, and I think he has come a long way mechanically since then. It seems like he has cleaned up a lot of, some of the lagging arm action. I think that he's definitely a lot more refined of a passer. I think as a sophomore, he was more of an athlete still, getting comfortable as a pocket passer. And now you're seeing a lot of good things out of him on tape. And he's still using his legs to make plays, still taking advantage of that high-end athleticism to get the job done for Archbishop Spalding. So he's definitely a big, big visitor on a list that features a lot of important names. There might not be many that are more important than Malik Washington right now.
And he got a pretty serious background as well, playing high-level AAU circuit basketball, and you can kind of see that projected when he gets out there and maneuvers. But when we saw him, kind of be asked to be a passer, you're right. It was kind of an elongated throwing motion that we saw last summer. It looked better coming into his junior season based on what we saw from the camp stuff, and haven't had a chance to dig into his junior film yet from Archbishop Spalding at Maryland. But yeah, I mean, the prospect profile athletically really lines up, and he seems to be a passer moving in the right direction. That's a good combination. Penn State will get a closer look at him on Saturday, and vice versa, as Drew Aller makes his fourth career start and his first one in a Whiteout showcase. Last name to get to, and let's take it down to the 2026 class, and we're doing that for a good reason. Player who is among the names to know nationally in the 2026 cycle, Kendre Harrison out of Reidsville in North Carolina. We're talking about a 6'7", 235-pound sophomore, rated number 1 among tight ends and the number 5 overall prospect in the class. I think he's labeled as an athlete right now. I think that's probably the safe way to go. I understand why we have the tight end application, but use your imagination when you're using a 6'7", 235-pound frame with 3 seasons of high school football ahead of him.
Yeah, let me just reiterate that. 6'7", 235 as a sophomore, and he's the number 5 player in the nation. I mean, that's kind of all you need to know about this kid. He can do a lot of different things out there, man. Yeah, we got him listed as tight end right now. He's got that athlete distinction on his profile. A lot of programs are giving him first look at tight end.
By the way, can I do that? Can I add one more thing? As a freshman last year, and they like basketball down in North Carolina, that school won a state championship game. He averaged 25 points and 15 rebounds as a freshman. He also reports tandem offers, so he's being recruited as a basketball player and a football player by Florida State and Texas A&M and Wake Forest. Schools that want him just for football include Alabama, Coach Prime's Colorado Buffaloes, Florida, Michigan, Ohio State. And I lay all that out there just to set you up, because this fella could be in any stadium across America on Saturday, and you're getting him a very, very early glimpse into the Whiteout. And you never know, for wherever this recruitment's going to go down the road, he's going to have this experience in his back pocket.
He is. And when he caught up with Brian Doan to kind of dive into the early stages of his recruitment, he kind of laid out the Whiteout as one of those can't miss experiences. He was saying once that Penn State offer rolled in, he was like, man, I knew I got to get up to the Whiteout. And that's what he's going to be doing this weekend. So not a whole lot of intel to share on his recruitment just because it's so early. But I mean, man, I encourage our listeners to go check out his profile, and don't just stop there. Go on his huddle, check out some of his film, and check out some of his basketball highlights too. Because, man, this kid is one of the more dynamic overall athletes in that class. And I don't just mean that from a football standpoint. I mean athleticism in general. I mean, he is, you hate to throw the word around because it gets thrown around pretty often these days, but I mean, he's a freak athlete. He is. And I'm really excited to see where his development as a football player goes. What side of the ball he sticks on. He could do it on both ends, man. He can play tight end, he can play D end. I really like this kid's game. And I mean, he's one of the best players in the nation.
I don't know if we'll see him play college football. If I'm being, if he's being recruited, and he's being recruited at this level of basketball this early, and the way basketball is trending in, and how much money you can make immediately out of high school, the amount of money you can accrue in those 3 years that you would otherwise be playing college football. I don't know. There's a lot to delve into with Kendre Harrison, but he'll be in Happy Valley this Saturday if that plan sticks, and that's notable. And I'm glad we got to it here on the podcast. Hey, I mentioned it earlier, 30% off an annual subscription, $1 for 1 month, again, in lions247.com. It's a great time to do it because we're just getting rolling on Whiteout weekend. From a recruiting standpoint, it's action-packed. We'll have a lot coming your way about this top 25 matchup, but don't set it to the side. It's part of the marquee Whiteout spectacle is what we get from the recruiting end. So, Tyler, we'll keep following your coverage, and Brian Doan and Steve Wolfong and Alan True and everybody who's going to weigh in. But good stuff on the pod today. We'll get back with you later on in the week to get another look towards the Whiteout and its significant impact on Penn State.
Thanks, man.
All right, talk to you soon. Great stuff from Tyler Calvaruso, Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen. Went over at Howard today on a Monday coming out of Game 3. Another episode coming your way Tuesday. We'll start to really turn our attention towards this number 7 Penn State versus number 24 Iowa Hawkeyes matchup. David Eichholt, who's been covering Iowa at a very high level for several years now. He's been on our podcast a few times. He'll make his return on Tuesday to give us a better look at 3-0 Iowa. And additionally, we will hear from James Franklin on Tuesday. We'll have a chance by the time we sit down to record to also speak with a couple different Nittany Lions players. We'll bring you what we're hearing from early Game 4 storylines. That and a lot more coming your way on the next episode of Lions 24/7 podcast. In the meantime, find all of our coverage at lions247.com. Stepping aside for now, I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks for always listening.